Metal Jesus here, and I am back with the immortal John Hancock.
Glad to be here. Today we're showcasing a buyer's guide for new 2600 owners. Plus we're going to showcase the 10 essential games that any new person should have for their 2600.
Let's take a look. So the point of this video is to help new collectors who are looking to get into the Atari 2600, and maybe you are like at a pawn shop, at a thrift store, maybe you're at a garage sale and you're like, okay, what do I need to know to get into collecting? So we're gonna start with the hardware.
Absolutely. And so first off, we have the 6-switch.
That's right.
Yes.
So one of the interesting things about the Atari is that these games are so old that they did not have menus in them. I mean, it's very primitive time, right?
Absolutely.
And so when the Atari came out, it's important to know that this is your menu essentially right here, which is kind of cool. It's one of the things I like about the Atari.
Yeah.
So you have your power, you have your TV type, you have color and black and white, because at the time, of course, there was a lot of black and white televisions.
And if you're rich, you had color.
Exactly. And then you have difficulty switches here for both of the players, which is kind of interesting. But this is the important one here, the game select.
Absolutely.
So one of the really fun things about Atari games is that a lot of times they would come with multiple versions of it, right?
For example, Combat, the Pac-Man game for the 2600, had 27 different types of games built in. And to get to the different types, you would have to select on the system the game select.
And what's really cool about that is that these game types, especially in Combat, were varied. I mean, you had
tanks,
that's
you
right,
had planes, biplanes, jets, invisible walls, bounce, pong, tank pong.
Yeah. And
the list goes on and on. Great drinking game, by the way.
Dude, it's still fun today. And I mean, it's amazing how much variety they got out of just Combat on Atari. I remember as a kid, we played it for months, you know?
And I brought it, I teach college, and I brought a 2600 in, and I showed Combat to my students, and they loved it. So
that warms my heart.
Yes,
that warms my heart.
Right here.
Okay, so this is the 6-switch version of this, but there's other models, right?
Yes, there's a 4-switch, and some other things. They have a 2600 Jr, which is a smaller, compact version of the system.
Right.
They had an all-black version, also known as the Vader, which is short for Darth Vader because it was all black.
Oh yeah, it was so cool looking.
And then there's the Heavy Sixer, and the reason why the Heavy Sixer, it has a different front. It's a little bit more curved, and it was heavier. It had a more, I think, more lead in the
more shielding, essentially.
More shielding,
yeah,
yes.
That's right. And so, yeah, if you ever run across a Heavy Sixer, and you're for one, and if it's a reasonable price, you should definitely pick it up because they are quite collectible. This is, of course, not that, but you can get them. I mean, this is in great shape. I got it at a garage sale. I paid $10 for it, which seemed like it seemed like a really good deal. But I mean, it had been sitting in her car for years.
Wow.
Years and years and years, and I was very happy to take it and add it to mine. So, okay, so let's talk about like connecting it.
That's a big thing. A lot of people will get a 2600 and then it's like, it's not working on my TV. The one thing you got to remember, this thing's so old, is that you do not use the AV selection on your TV. You have to go to channel 3 or 4.
Right.
And also you have to correspond that with your channel select on your system.
Right. There's been times where that's tripped me up, where I've hooked it up and, you know, and I know how this stuff works, but I'm like, why is there no signal, you know? Well, it's either not right on here or my television isn't right, so.
Absolutely. Then,
yes,
you have this connection, which you cannot plug directly into your TV. You have to have an additional device.
Right.
Back in the day, there was these. They look a lot different. An RF switch.
Yeah.
And you have to make sure that the little lever is to game.
Right.
You plug that into here, and then plug this into your cable port on your television.
Or me, because my TV in our bedroom was so crappy at the time, we didn't have it, so we actually had to hook these things to screw them in, right? It was
old school.
Old school.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily have to use an RF switch. It's interesting because, like, if you go to Fry's, you can get this little adapter, essentially.
Female to male adapter, coaxial adapter.
Yeah, which is like a $2 part or something like that.
It's really cheap. And actually, I recommend that because by using that small part versus this, you are going to have the best signal possible. Yeah,
that's a good point, because often these things start to fail, or they get kind of crusty, or you'll sit there and you'll have to kind of like go back and forth a bit. So, but the other thing too I would also mention is that if you're serious about Atari, you might as well go ahead and just invest in an old school television.
Yes, I recommend using an old school television. You can find them typically at thrift stores or yard sales, and it doesn't have to be a large TV. You can get a smaller one, which might be good if you're limited on space.
Yeah, no, and it'll look fantastic. It'll look like, you know, 1977. It's awesome.
All right, the controllers.
The controllers. One of my favorite things about the Atari, because it's so iconic. So here they're bundled together here, but here is the iconic Atari controller.
Yep, and you know, you simply have your directional movement with that and one action button.
I know, it's brilliant.
The other thing that's good to know is that if you do not have these controllers with your system, you can use a Sega Genesis controller and use that as a backup, because it has the same connection using the middle, I do believe, the B button for action.
Actually, that's a good point, is that there are an awful lot of these kind of controllers out there, not just Atari, but like, for instance, the Commodore 64. You reminded me is that the Commodore 64 had the exact same input. And so you might get like computer joysticks that are the clicky ones, like from Epix, things like that.
Awesome. Or the Wiko, Wiko controller.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
But this isn't the only one.
Correct. Atari actually had two official controller types. The other one was the paddle controllers, and those were used for games like Breakout, Super Breakout, Warlords, and Night Driver.
Night Driver, I remember that.
Yeah, and so there was several good playing games that you could use the paddle controllers with, and they're worth picking up.
Yeah,
they're recommended.
I mean, especially the games you mentioned. I mean, they're classics, and there was enough of them to justify that kind of controller.
Absolutely.
So that's the hardware.
Next up, we have essential 10 games that any new 2600 collector must have in their collection to begin with.
That's right. Each one of these games, we think, you know what? If you're going to jump into the Atari, you just can't go wrong.
That's right. First up, Joust.
Yes. Based on the arcade game, that was an 80s classic.
One thing great about the 2600 is, even though the graphics were simple, this represents everything that was great about the arcade. Two-player, you can play with your your second player, or you can screw them and get them killed. And
it emulated that sort of flight physics really well. I'm doing the ostrich.
What's great about a lot of these recommendations is that they're cheap. This game is cheap.
Absolutely. Next for me, well, let's see here. I'm gonna go here. Pitfall 2. So here's the thing. Do I pick Pitfall or Pitfall 2?
Pitfall 2.
Okay, but here's the thing, is that Pitfall, when it first came out, was revolutionary. I mean, it was one of the first platformers, and it was amazing. I remember the day that I brought that cartridge home. So I didn't think it could be topped, but Pitfall 2 is, I mean, amazing for an Atari 2600 game.
Absolutely. You know, it had so many things that were complex. It wasn't a single screen. It had an ending too, didn't it?
Yeah, and it's a massive cavern. I mean, the map on it is really astounding. So I think this is a really impressive game. It's still really fun today. It's challenging, a total blast.
Next up, another pick of mine is Millipede. And Millipede, I think, is better than Centipede. Centipede was kind of simplistic. Millipede is like you add ADHD to Centipede and you get Millipede. And it's action-packed, it's fast, it has, again, all the mechanics that the arcade had, and it's pretty inexpensive.
All right, for me, I'm going big. I'm sticking with Activision. I'm a big fan of Activision. That is a game I still love to play even to this day, and that is River Raid. So this is the box, this is the cartridge. Oh my God. So first of all, it is one of the best vertical shooters ever made. And it's really different too, because since you're flying down this, it's like a valley, or what would you call it? It's like a...
Yeah, you're going along a river line, I think.
Yeah. And so you basically can't touch the walls on either side, which is so different than most of these games. And it's challenging, but it's so much fun. Atari Age every year does a contest where they try to get high scores of the different forum players, and every year I compete.
Oh, yeah.
I've never beat it, but I am determined. I love this game.
Next up for me, and hands down one of the best paddle games, is Warlords. Now, it's important to know that you need 2 sets of paddles. Now, paddles come in pairs, but essentially what you're doing is you're guarding your castle against other players, and you're trying to break through their castle walls with your square, ball, cannon, whatever it is.
It's a cool variation of Breakout, essentially. Yes. But it's an awesome couch co-op multiplayer game.
Yep, and it's cheap, $1. You can find this $1, a couple bucks, all the time.
Yep, so good. Okay, so next up, I'm going to pick this one, even though you brought this one over. But once you said Berzerk, I was like, oh, dude, I remember playing Berzerk as a kid. Probably drove my parents crazy because this was a great arcade game. But to be able to play this at home in my bedroom, sitting on the floor, was awesome. And it's super fun. It's basically this, you wouldn't call it endless runner, but essentially it's these randomized rooms, and you are trying to just survive as long as possible. Shoot the robots, they're trying to shoot you. You're trying to avoid, what is it, Evil Otto?
Evil Otto.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just a really great Atari game. I mean, it defined the system back in the day.
The other thing about this is this goes back to the game select on the system, and there's multiple difficulties, and so there's some really challenging difficulties you can play. Yeah. And for people that got used to playing the game and getting really good, I think game setting 9. I think game select 9 is the challenging one.
That's impressive.
Yeah. All right, my pick. So there's Pac-Man and there's Miss Pac-Man, but there's also Junior Pac-Man Jr.
Right.
And this was a kind of a later release on the system. And even though the graphics aren't good, the gameplay is really challenging. And it's my favorite type of maze-style game on the system.
Now, it's worth noting, too, that there's a bit of history with Pac-Man on the Atari. Back then, Pac-Man was huge. And I remember vividly being really excited when the original Pac-Man got released on the Atari, and it was utter crap.
Yeah, it just wasn't, blocky graphics, Pac-Man.
Flickery.
Yeah.
He did bonk, 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 and he didn't turn and stuff. And the reason why I bring that up is because as disappointing as that was, you could tell that they didn't give up, because they made Miss Pac-Man, which actually was pretty decent.
Really good.
Yeah.
And then Pac-Man Jr., Junior Pac-Man, it was even more challenging playing it. For a lot of tournaments that we've done in previous Portland Retro Gaming Expos, way back when, we used this cart because it's so challenging.
Huh. All right, so the next one will be no surprise to anybody because you saw it in the intro and you see it in every intro of my video, and that is because it's one of my all-time favorite games of all time. I've hyped it enough. It is H.E.R.O. Helicopter Emergency Rescue Operations on the Atari 2600. So the reason why this is important to me is because it's the first game I became really passionate about. You know how people are really passionate about Super Mario Brothers, yes, or name is the Legend of Zelda or whatever. This was my first passion and obsession with the game. I'm still really good at this game because I played it to death. It's just a fantastic game. It's a late release game. On, I think it came out in '83 or something like that, and it's really impressive for the Atari. It has, I think, 19 or 20 levels. They're challenging. You really have to memorize. You have to deal with the physics. Yeah. I have multiple copies of this game because I never want to be without it.
Well, I think I also want to say that Activision was a big third-party company. Yes. One of the very first, wasn't the very first, but was the very first successful third-party company. So anything that Activision did on the 2600 is going to be decent.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, honestly, we could have done an entire video just based on Activision games because there are so many. It's just that although I picked, what, 2 or 3.
Yeah. All right, we have to nominate this, and I think this gets special discussion because there is a thing called homebrews, and homebrews are games that have been programmed recently or within the last couple years, and people go out of their way to put them on physical cartridge. Right. Well, there's a whole website that supports this type of programming, and it's Atari Age for the 2600, and there's an amazing library of homebrew games that are made within the last decade or two. And this gets special consideration because it's Space Rocks. If you notice that the font looks like asteroids, you're absolutely correct. Right. This takes the original asteroids on the 2600 and blows it out of the water. It's amazing.
Yeah. So when Asteroids first came out on the Atari 2600, it was a really awesome game. I played it an awful lot back as a kid, but it wasn't exactly like the arcade. The asteroids didn't move in like the randomized way as the stand-up arcade machine, which was fine. Again, it was a lot of fun. There was also a lot of flicker in the original one. This game is the definitive version of that arcade on Atari. It's amazing.
Control options. I think there's a paddle option. There's graphic options. You can even have it look like the vector style graphics of the arcade. It's amazing.
Yeah, this is a must-own for anybody who's serious about Atari. All right, and then finally is a game you picked.
Yes.
So I gotta admit though, I don't know much about this game. I played Demon Attack and some of those other games by iMagic. Okay. Tell me about Atlantis.
Okay, so iMagic is my favorite game company for third-party companies. And so iMagic essentially is, there's a ship coming across the top of the level and it's blasting your city, and you have to defend your city from this alien. And if it gets too close to the bottom, it zaps your city or cracks the glass. And one thing I like about this is just the graphics are great, it's good gameplay, and I just remember playing this game hours upon hours because it was one of only 3 Atari games I had at my cousin's house. There was Combat, Atlantis, and Demon Attack, and so I got really good at one of those 3 games, and this is the game I preferred.
All right, well, that is our buying guide for the Atari 2600, but you know what? There are so many great games that came out on the Atari. I feel like there's a couple out there that we might have missed. I don't know. I don't know. You know what? We'd love to know what you guys think. What would you recommend to the new Atari collector? Please post down in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. All right, dude. Thanks for coming on, man, helping with this.
I love it.
Awesome having you on the channel.
Yeah, I love being here.
All right, thanks for watching my channel. Thank you for subscribing, and take care. If you enjoyed this video, I happen to have a couple other Atari 2600 videos on my channel, so definitely check out the Hidden Gems series, located up in the corner.